All right, welcome back. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a little drawing of a cube this time using those form shadows that we've already talked about. We've got the different materials that we're going to be using here. I've got all 5 pencils. I got my 4B, my 2B, my HB, my 2H, my 4H. So we're going to be using those. Move those over to the side here. I'm also going to be I might be using this a little bit, I'm not sure, but I'll put it out here just in case. Again, this is just one of these small white erasers that are kind of like a mechanical pencil of sorts. Again, I don't know if I'll use it, but I'll keep it over here just in case. Definitely going to probably be using this white eraser here, as well as my kneaded eraser. And we're going to go ahead and now it's very lightly drawn. It's probably going to appear that as I start to draw this. We're going to have the light on this is going to be coming from. Now sometimes you'll see when people draw, they'll make a little an ellipse, and it looks like a cone. And the reason that they'll do that, they'll make a little cone like this to show the light. And they'll do that instead of just a pointer. And the reason why is because the pointer, you can't tell whether this is at this angle, but is it from the back or the front? Well, the moment I put an ellipse on there, if I can't see, like if this is the ellipse behind here, that means that's from the back. If I have an ellipse that's, I can see the front of the ellipse, that means it's around the front. So this is my ellipse right through here with my little cone. Okay, so that means that the light is a little bit in the front. This is probably a little bit too much. The opening of the ellipse becomes important because the more open it is, the more it's around the front. I wanted this to be a little more from the side, so I just realized that my ellipse should probably be something about like this, truth be told. So again, because I'm seeing less of the ellipse, that means that light is moving further. Now, of course, I better be thinking about, which I didn't. Any of those that have taken the beginning class go, look at that, well, the alignment of the major axis should be 90 degrees to this line, which it was not. And so I was trying to say that any of you that have had the other class hopefully would be like, wow, man, look at that. He didn't align that major axis to this line here. So it was looking like it was cut at an angle instead of being straight to that. And so anyways, but this is my little cone, probably seeing a little bit less of this. So that means again that the light, as you're seeing less of the ellipse, it's going around this way. If I was seeing it, straight, without it being in the front or the back, it could be straight like that, but that means it's true side light. This is side light where I'm seeing a little bit of the front, so that means that the lights come around the front and it's pointing down. My cone's also not symmetrical. It should come here and be at a point on that line. But anyways, all that technical jargon, which has very little to do with our shading, but it certainly is important. So now I've got a cone that's a little better. It's not perfect, far from it, but it's looking better than what it was before. So anyways, this is going to be my light source. So it's going to be above. In fact, I'm not going to go ahead and take the time to redraw it the way I did with this one, but I'm probably going to change this to probably something closer to this in terms of that light source. Okay, I just realized that this is going to be hitting this edge at almost 45 degrees. If I'm hitting 45 degrees to this little edge, you can't see it because I've got it so light, but this top and this side, you won't be able to see it. Well, you'll be able to see it, but they'll be almost the same value. If I bring the light up, or if I brought it down, that means that more light's going to be on one plane than the other. And I made a really short cast shadow, so we're going to go ahead and bring this up to about like that. So that'll be where the light is. And what that means for my, now again, I'm not drawing this from reference. I'm going to show you some where we are drawing from reference. But the idea is I'm just thinking about the light. If the light is up here, this will be my top plane, this will be my medium plane, and my shadow plane. I'm going to go ahead and start putting some value in, just so we can see where these are, because again, it's hard to see at all what we're doing. Now, I was going to start this on the top, but maybe we'll come back over here and start this in the shadow side. So, just like we were, when we, now I should actually probably take some time, but in fact I'm wondering, well, so we're going to just go ahead and start putting in some value. I'm just going to be working side to side, just like we did on the sphere to begin with. And I'm doing a rough end, so I'm using a wrist swing. I've got a 4B pencil. I'm using very light pressure for this wrist swing. And I'm just roughing in the shadow shape. Now the shadow shape on this is just basically, well, there's the cast shadow too, though I might hold off on putting in the cast shadow just yet, just because if I merge them all, I might lose my line. And I took some time to kind of really clean the line up, keep it nice and clean, or straight. And if I lose it through the shadow, it's just going to be more time to try to recreate that. So, in fact, I'm going to go along here while I'm thinking about it. Create some value along that edge. And create some value coming out. So, and I can go ahead and I'm going to try to keep the drawing as straight as possible. Usually, you know, I'll lean the drawing or rotate it as I'm working on different places. You've seen me do that on the cone, and probably the sphere as well. And that's okay. I kept that in there. It looks just so to give you permission that yes, you can certainly do that. But I'm going to see if I can try to keep this as vertical as possible, just so it's not as distracting as I'm creating this. Jump to a finger swing because again I'm trying to keep this edge, and it's just a back and forth finger swing. It's not a tapered stroke. It's not that feathered stroke. It's just a regular, just a regular back and forth stroke that I'm using on this. And now that I've kind of defined my edges, I was going along the edges a little bit, again to define them. And now I'm going to come back. I'm using my, again, I'm just hovering above the board. You probably can't see, but I'm using a wrist swing with a tripod grip. And again, I'm just going back and forth. Again, this is a rough end. I'm not worried about the fact that I've got some edges showing, like where this value hits that value, there's a bit of an edge. I'm not worrying about, again, it's just a rough end. And so I'm not worrying quite so much about that. I can get rid of that later. And I don't have, I'm not going to get rid of it by using my finger. I'm not going to get rid of it by using a cotton swab or a brush. I'm going to get rid of it by going over it and over and over it with value. So again, the whole point of this class is to learn to control your pencils. Once you have control over your pencils, well, then you can do whatever you like. But that's to give us a full foundation. Sometimes when people are drawing, they'll be like, oh no, I've got to use a blender. I can't do, and so they'll talk themselves into the fact they can't do anything without a blending tool. And then lo and behold, they can't do anything without a blending tool. If you just go, look, I'm going to go ahead and learn how to do, create values with my pencils only, well, then the blending tools give you just a lot more freedom and give you a whole new level. But you're not doing it because you're afraid of the pencils. You're doing it because you're like, okay, I can do the pencils. I got that. No big deal. Now let's try some of this blending stuff to give me different textures, to give me a little different feel to the edges, to do, it bumps up how quickly you can do a drawing and how you can play with edges in a much quicker way. Because we don't want to sit here for 3 hours or something while we're doing this. I should say, I meant for this particular drawing, but 3 hours for any drawing is really not that long at all. Most of your average, an average drawing is pretty quick. If I can bang something out in 10 hours or create something or draw something in 10 hours, that's pretty quick for drawing. Usually your drawings will start at about 10 hours on most drawings. And then with pencils especially, pencils are much more, usually they just take a little longer. And you're usually going to be dealing with a little more detail and subtlety and nuance. That's what really pencils are for. That's their strength. And so why wouldn't you go with their strengths? So again, I'm using an elbow swing now, because I'm drawing through a larger area, and I'm trying to keep that edge again nice and clean. Okay. And so you might hear me scooting around. I'm actually scooting the chair back and forth to give me different angles so I can keep this drawing again straighter to the camera, so you'll have an easier time seeing what I'm doing. So again, I'm changing to a wrist swing. Again, a wrist swing is, now I am drawing flat, which again is not ideal, but for setting up a camera and the camera angles and stuff, it is ideal, but it's not ideal for drawing. So normally I'd be like, no, anything but. I'd rather give a pinky finger than have to normally draw flat, because you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Be almost similar to making a baseball player or somebody like that, or a tennis player or something, to have to wear an eye patch or something over one eye. You're really hamstringing some of your efforts in many ways. All right, so we're going to start trying to get this value to be a little less rough and scribbly. I'm taking my time. I'm trying to build on the layer that I had below. And again, when you haven't done flat planes are a little different than round planes. Again, I'm using an elbow swing with a tripod. So again, this will give me a little more control. The longer I can make a continuous line, the more even that value will be across that area. So again, I'm using that elbow swing to help me to create a better chunk of value. At some point I'm going to have to come in here where this is sort of darker through there. The lucky thing is this is just so light, because this is going to go far darker. Even though this is supposed to be a lighter cube, this is the shadow side, so it's going to be going darker still. And I'm going to be talking to you just about general value ideas. I'm not doing this from a particular cube. I'm visualizing, I've drawn enough cubes where I can visualize what it would be happening in a convincing way. If you're, in the plan to work in Hollywood or something like that, where you're going to be doing lots of concept art, or if you're going to be working in sci-fi fantasy illustration or something, or creating paintings in that sort of a subject matter, you're going to need to understand enough about value so you can just create stuff. And a lot of it has to do with understanding the way light works. And with something simple like this, we're going to have a light value, a middle value, and a dark value. This is our dark value. In terms of the form shadows we're going to have on here, because this is a square and or a box, anything that's not round, we only have 5 different form shadows. Okay, so the 5 form shadows that we're going to have here, so these are our 5 form, and maybe I should put, you know, whatever, maybe I'll just go ahead, this is shadows. But we're going to have we're going to have light values. I'm just put LT values. We're going to have 2, we're going to have highlight. Now this isn't in any sort of, isn't in like the lightest order from light to dark, but I mean it will, but the idea is that highlight and light values can change depending on certain ideas. How dark is the object? How light is the object? So we got light values. We're going to see highlight on this. For 3, there's going to be middle values. With middle values, those can also be referred to as midtones. And sometimes they're also called halftones. Those all mean middle values. We do not have core shadow on flat objects, so no core shadow. We will have dark tones or dark values. Remember, tone and value are the same thing. Okay. And then the 5th one we're going to have is reflected light. Now, remember that dark values and reflected light these are part of the shadow family. Okay, so those will be the form shadows. We're also going to have some cast shadow over here. Now, I'm going to act like all this is about the same value. So this is a white cube on a white table with a white backdrop. Okay. I'm going to grab a 4H pencil because I have enough of these the form shadow or the shadow family here to be able to see, you know, what the shape is, this parallelogram, if you will. So we're going to come over here into the lights. I'm going to get a 4H pencil. My highlight's going to be along this edge. People will usually put a dark line there, but it's not going to be a dark line. That's our brain translating what is essentially going to be a light line. So we're trying to take that edge, and our brain will translate it into a line. Understand, when we take edges, turn them into lines, we are abstracting something. We are, you know, so it's not going to be dark at all, but we've decided, hey, I can see a plane change. And we've made it a dark line. But now, and I would if it was a contour drawing, but this is a value drawing. So again, I'm going to go ahead and put in the middle values. Now the middle values on this is probably going to be somewhere around like a step 7 on the value scale. You know, I guess I said this would be a white cube, so maybe this would be a step 8 on the value scale. So, again, you know, sometimes you'll hear me talk about keying in a drawing. And so when you hear some people talk about the key of the drawing, what they're talking about is how light or how dark is it. So you have either a high key, in other words with lighter values, or a low key with darker values. And for the most part, most artists will, you know, if you look at Rembrandt, definitely low key. Someone who is definitely high key might be like Monet. Definitely worked in a higher key or higher register of values, the upper end of the value scale, right? So like Monet would be high key, Rembrandt would be low key. And so think of that as we're thinking about that. That's, you'll hear someone say keying in a drawing. You might say, well, wait a minute, you're just talking about how light or dark. What I'm talking about is how light or dark is the overall image. So in a Monet, you might have nothing's darker than a step 5, and everything else is a 6 and a 7 and an 8, a 9, a 10, much on the lighter end of the value scale. Meanwhile, Rembrandt, the lightest thing in a Rembrandt might be a step 6. And everything in that Rembrandt is either, you know, a 5 or a 4 or a 3 or 2 or 1, you know, very, very dark, much darker. And so that's the idea of high key versus low key. There at a certain, you know, the most of the painting sits in a particular part of the value scale. Well, we can also say keying in a drawing, and that just means, hey, what's the lightest light and what's the darkest dark? And you'd be keying in the painting, whether you're doing a high key or a low key. It just says, hey, what's the lightest that will be in my painting, and what's the darkest that will be in my painting? Or in this case, what's the lightest in my drawing? What's the darkest in my drawing? It's just you're making the decision, and then you're going to relate everything to that. And it's very similar to music. When you say I'm playing in the key of G or something like that. I don't know my music enough. I wish I knew a little better. But in the key of, you know, whatever, say the key of G or something like that. In music, a key has a certain collection of notes for that key. And it's the same thing. Now, I was using a 4H before. Over here, I used a 4B. Over here, I'm using a 4H. And now I'm going to go to a 2H for a moment. I'm using now I'm using a feather stroke. Sometimes I'll do this stuff and not even think about it. It's not like I have it planned out. I think I want it to go a little quicker though, so because a feather stroke takes much longer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use a side-to-side stroke instead to create this value. And again, we're just trying to, this is going to be our middle value, so we don't want it too dark, don't want it too light, all that good stuff. All right, on our middle value. Okay. I should probably be taking a little more time, but again, I'm trying to do this as quick as possible, so that way, again, I could take my time with this, but again, I'm trying to keep it as create this drawing as fast as possible, and still have some control over it. So there's times I'll slow down because I'm like, oh nope, you're getting too fast. Because again, we do want to take our time. The faster we go, the less control we have of the drawing. Again, I'm trying to control this edge. In other words, I'm trying to make sure I don't go outside the line. So what have I done? I've slowed down. I'm using a feathered stroke. Remember, the feathered stroke is the most controlled type of stroke we can make. And I'm just going to, again, continue to fill this in. Now, I don't know if you remember from the other two drawings that we've done, but remember that the B pencils is a 4B, and the H pencils, this is a 4H and a 2H, I've got a 2H right now, are not only lighter, but they also go down smoother. And it's also a little harder to not leave the lines between lines when we're dealing with, let me grab my 4H again. When we're dealing with the, or when we're using a 4H pencil or an H pencil, they are smoother, but they also are a little less forgiving. It's a little harder to get that nice even tone. We have to slow down more. We have to take our time a little more. We have to layer, go over and over stuff. And because we have to layer, that's why I got the 4H pencils, because I can layer over this and over this and over this, and it won't get all that, it won't get much darker very quickly. So I've got more room I've got more control because I have to kind of, I don't have to, if I went over one place and it was just, I knew it was going to go too dark and I had one chance, well, that would be a very difficult pencil to control. But this one, I could go over there half a dozen times and still, nope, I need to darken that a little bit more. I need to come over here. You have you have more options because, again, it's a very light pencil. All right, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to come back and we're going to continue on drawing this cube. So we're going to continue to just, I've got this 4H again. And I'm using again sort of well, I was using a tapered or feathered stroke or gradated stroke for a minute. And I said, well, you know what, that's too slow. Even though it's nice and controlled, I think I need to make better time. So I decided to go to a wrist swing. And so we can just continue to, again, make these values work. Now, this is not the correct value yet, but I'm going to come up here and put this value on so I can go ahead and, again, check my values, which we said was called keying in your values, and that means you're checking how light something is against something else. I'm going to leave it light along this edge for the highlight. Okay. Now, I could use this eraser and like a shield, like this is a triangle, or I could take and I could use something like, even a spare piece of paper as a shield, but I have to get a little tiny eraser mark off of there. So I'm going to come on over there with this paper, and the paper just protects, gives me a nice clean edge. Again, I was erasing right against that edge of the paper, and it gives me a nice clean edge where I was erasing. And so that will help me down on this end. So now we're going to go ahead and I'm going to use once again, I'm going to use a wrist swing. And this will be the lightest value of all. If this is all white and this is white and this is closer and these are both the same plane. This is horizontal, this is horizontal. But this up here is closer, then this would be lighter than the table, which in this case is supposed to be white as well. So we're just thinking about beams of light get less bright the further they have to travel. And so again, you can use that idea to help yourself create more realistic looks. Now I'm going to take out this line. I had sort of the back corner that you probably can't even see it because it's so light. But there was a bit of the back line as if this was transparent, and I want to take that out, so I just erase it off. Again, I'm using a wrist swing. I'm using a kind of a tripod, but it's not in the crook of my hand, and I'm kind of using all my fingers kind of together like this instead of having the thumb back. And I was using, again, a wrist swing. Now that right there is something strange in the paper that's starting to reveal itself. That could be a fingerprint. Unfortunately, no, it looks like it's where the eraser was being used. So that's what I mean, how if you're not careful, you can rough up the paper and it will never quite be the same again. Now this isn't too bad, so I think I can deal with it, but that's what happens. So for now, I'm going to lighten it. Now every time I go over it, it's going to go darker, so that's not the last time I got my little eraser, I pinched out a little tip, and I was blotting that little tip as I was, trying to lighten that area. Let's see if we can do this again. Now everything was white, but we need to have some value in it. So everyone's may or may not, but there's an old joke that, you know, contemporary artists with a white page of paper claiming it's a polar bear in a snowstorm. And whenever you're doing things that are all white, like let's say I was drawing something that's all white and I've got a light source on it, I'm going to have to lower the values of everything in order for it to have some value. Even your digital cameras, on the film cameras, you really had to do this. Now, and you can do this with the digital cameras too, where they'll have you play with the exposure, which that's what you're doing. You're making everything overall lighter or overall darker. The main thing that is affected is the middle values when you do something like that. But yeah, if I take a picture of snow, I have to have the correct exposure, and your automatic exposure is not going to help you on your phone or on your digital camera. So you have to play with the exposures. And the exposures make something either darker overall or lighter overall. And if I'm doing a snow, well then everything's white, it can get really blown out. Or your camera might try to overexpose, and it might go darker than what it looks, and these different things. So the camera doesn't see things the way the eye does. And so we have to kind of play with things to get a decent picture out of scenes that are like, you know, again, if it's mostly light, you're going to have to really work with that. If it was mostly black, same thing. We'd have to let more light in, which is going to lighten everything in general. So otherwise, you're going to have something that's going to go all black and won't have any of the detail. None of those wonderful form shadows going from light to dark to middle value. And so it's kind of like working in curves in some Photoshop-esque sort of program. Or on your phone when you're correcting for value, you can make things lighter, you can make things darker, you can make them with higher intensity or saturations, things like that. And you can make those, well, as that's, you know, we're doing this the old-fashioned way, but we can do the same thing. We're going to go, look, we're going to go ahead and make this a little bit darker than it would be, and usually the middle values and things like that, and we're going to deepen the shadows just a little bit too, and what will happen is that the object will have more contrast, more pop, as people like to say. It will jump out at us and catch our attention because of the fact that we are increasing the contrast and doing different things, because otherwise, if you're not careful, it won't have any depth. It'll feel really flat as a pancake because everything's so light. The shadows are getting blown out, the middle values are getting blown out, and it just won't have any of that wonderful depth. And again, if anyone's ever, you know, thought about or played with or had a class that talks about, you know, really good digital photography, and you used to have to do this in film too, you have to go in and play with the exposures in order for you to get a decent shot out of very extreme conditions. The extreme condition, everything is white. And because of that, the darkest dark might be a middle gray in the grayscale. But if that's what it is, well then sometimes your drawing will suffer. It'll be boring, you know, it won't have any of that excitement. It won't have any of that punch or pop, as some people say, which is just the contrast, the jump from light to dark. And so I'm putting just enough value around this cube. I don't want to do a full or even close to a rendering of the back of the wall. We're ignoring all detail of this cube. If this cube was a wood cube, we'd wait to the very end in order for us, you know, like the last 5% of the drawing, start adding the detail. And that's because detail has to conform to the form shadows. If this is light, medium, and dark, well then the striations or the wood grain would be light here and then medium here and then darker there. And there's also different contrast variations and other things, and we'd want to make sure we have some of that, otherwise it won't look as good. Now, I've been using this pencil and talking about all the kinds of stuff, but I think I need to mention that this right here is an HB pencil. And again, I'm using this HB pencil with a wrist swing. Actually, right now, it's not even a wrist swing, it's an elbow swing. And so I'm really trying to cover, I can cover a much larger area by using that. You know, sometimes I'm just doing this without even thinking about it. This is one of those times where I'm like, it's a wrist. I'm like, no, it's not, my wrist ain't moving. It's an elbow, and it's just, again, to cover more area. And that's why we use those different swings of the pencil to help us, again, cover more area than we would if I was using a finger swing. Now again, I want more control, so again, now I'm doing a finger swing along there, but as I come off of that edge, I can loosen up now because it's not as critical. So I'm going to go ahead. Again, I'm using an elbow swing to fill in some value. Okay. Again, this is the exciting part. And whenever we start a drawing, we usually will start on what some people will term the haze. And what that means is that you're gonna use just the basic values, and you can always darken them. With pencil, it's better to have to darken a value than lighten it, because when you start making it lighter with an eraser, it's going to start to, it's going to get patchy and splotchy, and it's going to be all you can to take a ton of time to make it no longer splotchy and then continue on. So if you have to be either lighter or darker than the object, be a little lighter. It'll be better for the object. So again, I'm just showing this is the edge of the back wall, and it's a vertical surface. Now it's not in full shadow. This is actually going to go darker, the shadow side. But it's a dark middle value. It's supposed to be in light, but it's supposed to be sort of a darker middle value. And I'm even thinking of going, well, what if we made it a light gray wall so that it will offset what's going on with the it'll offset what's going on up here, make it have more contrast. All right, we'll come back in a moment. All right, so again, I was using an so we're gonna go ahead and work a little more on this. Obviously, I've got a HB pencil here, and I'm going to put a little more value in here. And this is so we have some value around this cube. All right. And it's through the relationships of the different values that we start to get a relationship, we start to get a feeling of depth. So this is very similar to the grayscale. This is just a more complex grayscale. We need this to be smooth enough so that we are not distracted by all the various, the lines or some sort of patchiness or something like that, so that we can actually focus in on the object. And that's what we want, that's what we need. I of course could bring this further up if I'm using an elbow swing now, still using a tripod grip. But I could bring this up, and I could, bring this all the way up if I wanted to. I don't think it's necessary for this drawing. I just want enough so that we can deal, or so we can, start to view or start to see a relationship. I've also just picked up, so that was an HB that I had before, and I'm going to pick up a 4H. Now with this 4H, we can get in here and we can start to fill in some of the little, gaps. There's like I can see some lines that have formed because of, I think I was using a 2H here before, but some sort of harder pencil has established sort of these little lines. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to take those out. I'm also going to layer the 4H pencil over this background value. The reason we're using the 4H is because, like I have said in other videos, the 4H pencil is a harder pencil. It gets deeper into the texture, and it will, if I use this wisely, if I'm able to control this and give me an even tone, it will, you know, bring this together, pull this together, and it will seem less splotchy. It'll have a little less texture. It'll be more uniform and all that good stuff. All right, so that's what we're doing. We're trying to kind of pull all this together. We've got something weird coming off this corner. Again, the paper picked up a little bit of value differently. I'm going to take my neat eraser, and I'm going to blot it just a little bit, pounce it, whatever, but we're going to just kind of tap it on there slightly so it just barely makes contact with the paper and just takes off a little bit of that value. And now that's softened a little bit. I might have to do it again because as I go over it there, it's starting to appear once more. And that just means that's something I'm going to have to deal with this particular piece of paper. And you'll get that, and you'll have that happen with other things that will create that look. Again, with this, it's through layering of our graphite that this will start to appear. Now, I should probably mention that it can be very hard with a camcorder or a camera to not have a little bit of parallax. Parallax means that the parallel lines begin to start to converge. So I was looking at this, and it looks like, I mean, I've been using a level on this, so it's close, but it's still not perfect. And so this might seem to be coming down a little bit this way or leaning that way. And that means that you just don't have the lens exactly parallel with the surface, which that's what happens. And it's called parallax for a lens. And that's why when you're shooting stuff, you try to get it as level as you can. This is a little complicated because when the tripod is level, the camera is still out, and it's a smaller camera, so I get out a level and I try to take readings off of it, and it's just very hard to get it, you know, right on, doing exactly, you know, to not have any sort of parallax. That's a very hard thing to do. So I'm using a finger swing right now, still using this 4H pencil, and you'll see me jump between a finger swing to a wrist swing to an elbow swing. If I need to get into a smaller area, usually like I was just working on right there, I'll use that finger swing. If I think I need to, you know, like right now I'm using a larger area, so I'm actually using an elbow swing. And so I'm just jumping between those basic handholds, those basic ways of creating value that we've already talked about. And again, this 4H pencil, again, really begins to tie this stuff together. It's really nice. And some people would say, well, you could also do the same thing with a blending tool. Blending tools, remember, they will push the graphite in and it'll start to look a little dirty. So, and it'll also it'll obscure all your nice clean lines. Basically, it just won't look as clean than if you've taken the time to do this, you know, with layers. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep it, you know, using the layers to give us, you know, a really nice, these nice edges and all this stuff. And I'm probably taking a little bit too much time with the background because this isn't about the background, this is about the cube, but it has to be, the background has to be nice enough that I can ignore it. And that's very important. It's all about the relationship of, you know, the wall to the table, to the cube, and back and forth. And so that relationship can't be just done without a lot of attention to it. You can't just ignore it. You can't just, you know, do it like you're not paying enough attention, because it really, this whole illusion is really based on all the surrounding values, including the value of the wall. So again, I have to make sure that I've done it well enough that I can, I can ignore it. And that's something that's always in play, whether you're painting or drawing. There's a lot of times you're like, okay, this background stuff, I don't have to detail it, but there's got to be enough information that it looks like it belongs. There's got to be enough information so it doesn't become distracting. If it has too much information, it's going to become distracting. And so it's one of these, where you're trying to, you're trying to balance, how much this value and how dark this value is against this value, or how much detail is over here against, the detail over there. It's all about, trying to find that balance so it'll work. Again, I'm using a elbow swing and using a tripod grip, and I've got my little fingernail underneath. You probably can't see that, but that's what's giving me some stability as I'm doing this, is that finger that's dragging underneath gives me a little bit more control as far as that goes. Okay. And now I think we're getting there. I think we're getting enough information there where, again, we can start to ignore it. This would be, again, my middle values. And the middle values are usually going to, again, I have my 4H pencil. I'm just scooting this back and forth. So this isn't a tapered stroke. This is just a regular thing, oh, I'm not even using my fingers. So again, sometimes I do this and I don't even think about what I'm doing, and I look over and go, oh no, I'm doing something different. So I'm just using a wrist swing and in a tripod grip. I'm not even moving my fingers. So one range of motion. So again, sometimes when you've practiced this enough, it just becomes a habit. You'll start to just, change handholds without even thinking about it. It's like I had an acquaintance in college that was he was a world-class juggler, and he could he would talk about how whenever he was trying, when he was juggling, so I think he juggled up to seven balls, and I think he was working on juggling 8. And he would actually have people come in when he would like, ahead of time would coordinate with people to see if he had really gotten it. And he'd have someone come in and wake him out of his sleep and hand him his, his juggling equipment. And he said, look, when I can wake out of a dead sleep and I can juggle the appropriate amount of balls, I know I have that. I've got that skill. I've got it, where it needs to be. It's mastered. It's memorized. It's in the gray matter. Because you can do it just like it's, second nature, as some people might say. You just do it without even thinking about it. And that's what's happening here. When you start, using these different strokes, and once you get used to them, you'll start jumping back and forth, and you'll be able to focus more on the drawing, and you won't even really notice what one you're using until you start really, you're like, oh wow, I wasn't even thinking. I was kind of just going through the motions, doing what has to be done, instead of cognizantly saying, well, I got to switch to this. Oh, I got to switch to that. Oh, I got to switch this over here. You don't do that. You just automatically do what needs to be done because you've been practicing. That's why we practice. So we're going to go ahead and, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and bring this down a little bit, just a little bit more, because I think our video is getting a little long. But I'm just going to use my 4H pencil. I'm going to use a couple more layers to fill this in, and we'll come back. All right.